Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Insurance Journal's Academy of Insurance's weekly webinar after show. I'm your host, George, and joining me for the after show today is the director of the Academy of Insurance, Mr. Patrick Raitt, and our instructor for today's class. Today's class was part two of a two-part series, E&O issues you didn't see coming. And our instructor for today is Mr. Chris Burand. Chris, welcome to the after show. It's been a long time.
George, thanks. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure, and thanks again for part two of this great class. All your insights and knowledge and foreshadowing of things to come, possibly if we don't change how we can prevent E&O issues. You had mentioned in the beginning of part one that it was easier to mitigate E&O issues back in the days when you went through your checklist to make sure you didn't miss anything and filed your documents. When did it become super complicated when did E&O issues really start to manifest themselves more prevalently? Is it at the onset of technology, cyber, private equity? What time frame in the arc of insurance history did it start to get crazy with E&O insurance? E&O issues, I should say.
Yeah, I think the combination of cyber and the pandemic has exacerbated things.
Pandemic?
Really do. Cyber, pretty much 100% of all commercial businesses will have a cyber attack, and probably 100% will have multiple cyber attacks. Whereas 1 in 100 will ever have a fire. So for there to be an E&O claim, there has to actually be a loss. Well, if you only have 1 out of 100 having a fire, your odds of an E&O claim are pretty low right from the get-go. But when you have cyber where you have 100 out of 100, in and of itself, that's going to increase your exposure, all else being equal, overnight. And then you add to it the pandemic, and you have a change of attitude towards the industry. We have a situation where almost none of those claims were covered. We had people that suffered significant losses. And a lot of those people that lost the most money are very powerful businesses, very large businesses. And they've discovered they have no coverage. So I think they look at the industry and say one of two things: either you're going to provide coverage one way or another, E&O, or actually through a form, or we're just going to bypass the industry. And that just really has added to the whole situation. When people don't like, there's actually a number of studies out there that show that doctors that have a pleasant voice and are liked are sued far less for the same level of mistakes. So now we have a situation in our industry where we have given people even more reason to dislike us. And what our expectation should be that we would be sued more.
On the after show from Tuesday's class, I had speculated that do some of the problems stem, or some of the issues stem from a lack of education on are we not preparing account managers enough to sell insurance and the right policies? But in today's class, you talked about people selling policies that don't provide enough coverage, either knowingly or not knowingly, but on the knowingly side, or people that are selling like double coverage, things like that. So part of it could be a lack of education, but is part of it like making sure the account managers are vetted more carefully? Is it a lack of, maybe, and tell me if I'm if I'm putting you in quicksand, but is it possibly like a lack of ethics maybe, or just making sure that we instill the right ethics in people and instill the mission of the insurance industry into people? And is that not happening enough? And is that leading to potential E&O issues that we can correct on that side?
So I'm actually giving a presentation next week on that very subject.
Okay.
And I think we have to start out with what your definition of ethics are. And different people have different definitions of ethics. So from definitely from certain people's perspectives, there is has been a decrease in ethics in the last several years. Part of that is driven by how Silicon Valley has gone into different industries, and they've broken the rules. They've knowingly violated the rules and still succeeded. And so the perspective that has crept into a lot of industries, including our industry, is that, wow, all these insurance regulations just get in the way of making money. So let's just go violate them. I've heard a number of people, of insurtech people, say things like that to me personally. Like, I pointed out that you can't do that because it's illegal. Well, if we just do it fast enough and big enough, then they won't be able to stop us. So why bother? That's a common statement. So I think that's part of it as well, as far as the ethics part. And then the other part, I think, comes back our own fault. And we do these E&O classes that say, don't be a professional. Don't sit down and really suggest to people what coverages they need. And so people don't. And they're, oh, well, we're safe if we don't actually offer advice. And the attorney says, yeah, you are. Well, that's a slippery slope, George. I think we have ourselves to blame in many ways there.
Sure.
Fact is, nobody needs us if we don't offer advice. And if we go down that slippery slope where we're doing it wrong on top of it, then we've really negated our value.
Understood. Thank you again for your patience with my questions. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
I was trying not to guide you on any slope whatsoever. That would be too precarious. Patrick, your thoughts on today's class, and again on the topic in general, if people haven't caught our first after show about after the first class.
Yeah, and this conversation reminds me of something that comes up frequently, in my mind at least, and in some of our conversations we have. Insurance is a contract supposed to be of utmost good faith, where every player, every participant in the contractual process is acting completely honestly and completely forthrightly, in the best interests of the good of the whole thing, so that the person purchasing insurance ought to be providing accurate and timely information as they understand it to their agents, who ought to be asking the right questions and selling the right products and helping their clients the best way they know how, to the companies who ought to be providing coverage in according to how the policy is written, and not trying, none of them trying to cut corners or do anything they ought not to do. And what we end up having in this particular conversation, or in our class today, we see adjusters who appear to be either intentionally or just because they don't fully understand what they're doing, misinterpreting policy language, companies who are intentionally writing restrictive policies, not because they can't provide the coverage, but because they don't want to. And then you've got insureds who maybe intentionally or unintentionally hiding material facts about the thing, and then agents saying, well, we did the best we could, we tried not to be professionals here, and whatever happened to everybody in the whole thing just doing right and not trying to take some ethical strange leap of faith off into something else. But we need to get back to the utmost good faith part of this whole thing. And I'll get off my soapbox.
I agree with you 100%. But there are definitely business models that have been developed and really taken force, I'd say, in the last 5 years, maybe longer, I'm not sure, where the concept is that the agent actually owes the insured and maybe the carrier nothing. I think part of it, this whole subject's about education, right? I think part of it has come from the dumbing down of insurance education.
Mm-hmm.
The the emphasis of CE, whether CE is of value or not. One of the questions I get a lot that I used to not ever get is along the lines of, who do we work for? At someone at an agency saying, who do we work for? We work for the insured, always, 100%. It's like, that's not true. Your contract is with your carrier. And there's a real misunderstanding in our industry, especially for the people hired in the last 10 years, of who do you actually work for? Who do you have ethical obligations to? So I think a lot of people think they work for the insured. They don't have an ethical obligation to the carrier. Now, I think that's been lost somewhere along the way. I'm not sure exactly why, but I get that a lot when I'm in person. I gave a presentation about a year ago to a pretty big room of experienced agency owners, very experienced. And they had never heard of the legal concept of duality, which is what applies to independent insurance agents, not captive agents necessarily. But I think we need to do some education on what the legal theory of duality is, because that's the bedrock of the independent agency system. Without that legal theory, independent agents probably couldn't exist. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you have a different standard of care from an E&O perspective, where the legal theory of duality exists versus maybe possibly a captive agent or a direct writer, where that duality does not exist.
Right.
I think that's a really important training point, actually.
And I think that goes back to something that you mentioned earlier. The dumbing down of the whole process. Mm-hmm. People say, I've got a license, that's good enough. I've met my CE requirements, that's good enough. But honestly, an independent agent who is duly licensed in their state and able and willing to contract insurance transactions in their state, they may be licensed, but they don't know nearly enough about what they're trying to do. They're no more knowledgeable, as you had mentioned, than a properly programmed chatbot. Mm-hmm. They don't understand the nuance of the policy. They don't understand the nuance of an individual risk. A homeowner's policy may be a homeowner's policy if you're dealing with $250,000, $300,000 homes. But if you're dealing with anything outside of that, something on the coast, a mobile home, a mansion, or anywhere in between, there's more to it than just here's an HO3, have fun.
There certainly is. I'm going through that on a personal level right now. With some property I am personally looking at, and it's a scenario that I've never come across anywhere else. And all right, well, you could just throw on a regular policy, a regular CGL, right? No, you could. Would it be the right coverage? I'm pretty confident it's not the right coverage. Where I'm not confident is I don't know where it's not the right coverage. I don't. And I know a lot. And, so you have someone that's fairly new and just has a license. We're placing too great of expectations on those folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Chris, unless there's a part 3, I mean, I don't know. I think this subject is completely vital and essential, and we need to keep on thinking about these things. I really, really, on behalf of Patrick, I really, really appreciate your time and your help today. So thank you very much for all your insights. And I hope that these classes are hopefully a sign of things to come in a better light. Hopefully we can get a hold of, issues and prevent them and make it better for everybody. So,
well, use your checklist, and that will take care of a huge portion of the problems out there. Coverage checklists are like a multi-tool solution.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks, Chris. And Patrick, thanks for coming to the after show. Really appreciate having you here too. So
it's always one of the best things we do.
On behalf of Chris Burand, our instructor, and Patrick Reid, our director, this is your host, George, saying Thanks, everybody. Use your checklist and have a great day. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.